Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. For the record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
For the record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Today is Friday, the 22nd day of June 2018. I trust that everyone had a good night, good evening yesterday, good night last night. I know that a very special friend of mine had a good night starting at midnight. My good friend J.D. Martin and his wife Joni are celebrating their 11th wedding anniversary today. And like he said, it started from midnight last night. So I want to wish J.D. and Joni many more years of happy marriage as well. I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles, as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. For the Record is a show produced by the staff and management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor, and you're welcome to join me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Our phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls. Normally, that beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson. You can call us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flo. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. And if you don't like to talk on the telephone, you can email us at For the Record. That is one word, For the Record, at CANDW.KY. We also have a WhatsApp number. That number is 925-3261. You can leave us a voice note or send us a text message. If you leave a voice note, then that voice note will be played during the course of the show as well. Today being Friday, it's the day that has been assigned for the opposition to appear on For the Record. And it is my pleasure to have in the studio with me this morning the Honorable D. Ezard Miller, Leader of the Opposition. We also expect to have Mr. Christopher Saunders in with us this morning as well. So I believe Mr. Miller is filling in, for Mr. Saunders. And we'll have both of them once Mr. Saunders arrives as well. So I'm going to say good morning, Mr. Miller. Welcome back to For the Record.
Good morning, OC. And I don't know if I want to fill Chris' shoes, they big shoes, and he wears them heavy, thick boots. They're hard to drag around.
Yes.
But it's good to be here, and I'm sure he'll join us fairly shortly. We look forward to another interesting day. I think we had a good day last week, Friday, so we have some things to talk about. I guess maybe I should just get my announcements from my constituents out of the way before Chris gets here.
Okay.
And things. So first of all, I want to congratulate the Clifton Hunter High School students and the teachers. It was a wonderful graduation service there last night. I have some bright students, man. Let me tell you, there was one student named Miss Borden who I almost had to offer her my pickup truck to carry home the awards, and she got so many. But it was great to see the students doing so well, and we can't say enough about the unappreciated and undervalued teachers who spend their time and go the extra mile to make sure that these students succeed. Mm-hmm. Getting back to the Aidan O'Mile Primary School, the award ceremony for the year 1 to 5. We had a graduation ceremony for year 6 last Friday. Is Monday morning at 9 a.m. And just to say that my office is planning a summer camp at the Civic Center, and we'll get more details to that out soon, but we're trying to do at least a week. And some of the churches in the community are also sponsoring some weeks, so we look to try to have about 3 or 4 weeks of summer camp for kids during the thing.
Excellent.
And of course, our usual district council meeting will be Thursday the 28th at 8 p.m. in the Credockie Bank Civic Center.
Okay, and it's been a busy and exciting week. You had the CPA conference, regional one here in the Cayman Islands as well. Quite a large delegation, and probably a first for Cayman, for it being hosted in Cayman, of having someone from a non-Commonwealth country as an observer as well.
Yeah, there's a gentleman here from Cuba, and I tried to attend a couple of the sessions as much as I can, but I was particularly interested in the plenary session on population and how population growth should be managed in particularly developing countries like our own. And there were some very valid points made. But there was a very interesting intervention by the gentleman from Cuba when he said he would like to, if there had been, because our premier, the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, was one of the second presenter on the subject, and he did a good job. Mm-hmm. And then it was the first presenter was from the speaker from the Isle of Man, and both of those two countries have growing populations. Ours is and for people like myself, believe that it's far too fast. I tell people that, if I lived to be the age of my father, 84, 85, I would have seen the population basically double 4 times in my lifetime. Mm. And that's amazing. And the Honorable Premier presented it differently, in that I think it's the last decade, our population has grown by 70%. And the problem we're going to have with that down the future is that a huge percentage of that 70% is by immigration to Cayman. And we remember that we're mostly bringing in people who are in their 30s or older. So we're using, in terms of contribution to the social structure, we're losing a lot of the productive years, and could have problems down the road with an aging population. But it was very interesting. What the Cuban intervention was, his concern was, like most of the Caribbean countries, where they're having negative population growth, in the sense that they're just not having enough children born to replace so the people that are moving on or in various ways, whether by themselves migrating or by death. But he pointed out that one of the things some of the things they've done in Cuba, because I think their projection is that they will have negative population growth after next year, is what they have done for women, right? And that I think he said that in Cuba, a person is allowed to keep their job, and they're allowed 1 year paternity leave on pay. Mm-hmm. But that job is held for them. It's not a situation of somebody else taking the job from them, as often happens here.
Yes.
And one of the interesting thing was, he also pointed out that 50% plus of all the representatives in Cuba are women, which that's probably, I speak subject to correction, but that's the only country in the world that I am aware of with that is in fact the case.
Such a
because
high percentage.
in most countries there is this constant advocacy for more women to get it in politics and to get elected. We've been promoting this here for years, but we have now 3 in our legislative assembly right now, out of 19. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it would be nice to see that increase. But I think in all, these CPA conferences are well worthwhile conferences, because you get a chance to talk, particularly when we have the regional conferences like this one of the Caribbean and Americans. And even when you have the huge annual conference, there's always a carve out for small countries, and it's always interesting to sit down and talk to your peers about how they're dealing with some of their problems.
Okay. Now, I noticed and I heard some remarks from some of the participants in the conference that while current issues were discussed, the most pressing one, which has to do with the challenges from the UK as far as beneficial ownership is concerned and how that is approached, wasn't on the agenda for discussion, despite the fact that we know that overseas territory leaders were in London discussing the issue, as well. But they felt that there could be more coalescing of the overseas territories if they had an opportunity to discuss it, which they did, but it wasn't a scheduled item on the agenda.
We have to realize that the OT countries are outnumbered in the parliamentary association in the Americas.
Okay.
We're five. Was it five? Cayman, Bermuda, TCI, BVI, Angola, Montserrat, 6. Yes. Out of the whole countries in the region. Most of the countries were members of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association are independent countries. And are not facing that is not as immediate for them. I mean, the fact that they may have to go to open registry eventually, if it becomes an international standard, they will make that decision, right? And it will not be imposed upon them as is being done in our case and in the case of the OTs. But I would hope that the OTs who were present would have taken the time to discuss it outside of the plenary, because the other purpose of getting together as members of Parliament and members of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association is you get the chance to interact with people over coffee, over lunch, over dinner, over the social events, because that is where a lot of the opportunities to interact and share ideas and advice comes. The plenary sessions are usually limited to an hour and a half discussion, and it's usually one or two presenters, and you're allowed to ask questions. But I would hope that the overseas territories took the opportunity to talk a little bit about the pending and the whole idea of the constitutional overreach as we see it in Cayman.
Okay, we're going to take a commercial break, folks. Please stay tuned. For the record, with the Honorable D. Ezard Miller, Leader of the Opposition, will continue after this short commercial break. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Honorable D. Ezard Miller, Leader of the Opposition. Before I throw the mic back over to Mr. Miller, again, I want to express condolences to all of those families who have lost loved ones over the past week, and in particular to the family of the late Mr. Brasley McLean, his brothers, sisters, Topsy, Eleanor, Arden, Buster, his wife as well, and his children, to the whole family. We want to extend our sincerest and deepest condolences to them as well. I also want to remind our listeners that the debate of the Youth Parliament in the Legislative Assembly this morning will take place at 9 o'clock. Not wanting to distract anyone or to sort of lead them away from For the Record, but if you have an interest in the Youth Parliament debate, and that is involves regional participants as well, I believe, Mr. Miller?
Yeah. This will also be the first time that the regional youth parliament is being held in Cayman.
Okay.
But there are representatives from many of the Commonwealth countries, and Cayman will have its 2 delegates represented as well.
Okay, and I think they say it will be 19 debaters, Ms. Susan tells me. Yeah. So that will be carried on Radio Cayman 105.3 FM at 9 o'clock this morning as well. That would be Breeze FM, right? Okay. I two things I want to mention briefly. Number one, this whole issue of the amendment to the British Nationality Act and the removal of some of the requirements in there.
Such as
we haven't heard
such as character references.
Character references and
that's
things
very
of
troubling.
that nature.
That because they're threatening there to do similar to what they plan to do with the beneficial ownership.
Right.
They're
And we haven't heard any more about that yet. They have said that they will be consulting with the overseas territories because it will, affect us as well. I'm not sure whether or not there's any information that the government has that we don't know about yet. But
the government has it, we wouldn't know.
Yeah, but it is something that if it is available, they need to share it with the general public. They need to share it with the press, talk shows, and everyone, so that it is something that can be discussed. The other issue, Mr. Miller, is that we're seeing more information coming out from the Panama Papers. So this onslaught that we saw in relation to beneficial ownership, I think that's going to be a drop in the bucket in terms of what's going to come next. And in reading an article in the Guardian newspaper, they speak, and there's a paragraph that says the revelation will harden the resolve of anti-corruption campaigners who have argued the offshore sector needs to become more transparent. Last month, they secured a major victory in the UK when MPs passed a law requiring British overseas territories, including the BVI, to create public registers of shell company owners. So they see that as a major victory for themselves, for those persons who claim to campaign for transparency and against corruption in government.
But before I respond to that, just let me also extend my sympathy and condolences to the family of Timothy Rivers in Northside, and also to Brasley and his family and all the others who have lost loved ones in the past week or so. But yeah, they will use any excuse in to try and interfere, I believe, with our success in Cayman, and in my view, to a lesser extent, the success of the other overseas territories. But we have to be concerned about many of those things. I mean, I have some concerns about the planned amendments to the British Nationality Act, in particular what appears to be the removal of the requirement of character references and stuff. And when you look at the report that was tabled in the UK Parliament, there's, if you read between the lines, there's that underlying threat that they believe they can also legislate for us on immigration matters and Cayman status, which can lead to British national tax for non-British citizens as a result of their connection to Cayman. And this is why I have said publicly and told the Honourable Premier that the opposition will support him in doing whatever we can to put a front up and to stop the belief of the members of the UK Parliament that they can just, in many respects, arbitrarily legislate for local matters. We can't have a constitution that purports to devolve to us basically full internal self-government, but then they usurp that authority by using a particular clause such as 125 and claim that they're doing it for good order and order and good governance in the Cayman Islands, right? Because, and you know, we're getting back to the Paradise Papers and the Panama Papers. You know, one of the things that it doesn't seem as if the government has the legislative authority to do, is the local law firm should have some accountability in what happens here, because I would think, not being directly involved in the financial industry, and there'll be somebody call up and tell me I'm not a lawyer, but I got my share. I was in my mother's living room and they were distributing good old Cayman common sense, and I made sure I got my share. But they have a duty to protect their clients, and again, we don't know whether they didn't have sufficient protection from somebody hacking into their farms, but they should have to explain how that was possible to the country, because they're the ones that are giving us the black eye or the bruised cheek, whichever way you look at it, whether you're gray or blacklist, by allowing their system to be hacked. And we should have some system to hold them accountable for it.
And I'm sure that there will probably be private lawsuits against those law firms that you won't hear about because they simply won't publicize it. But I've seen several comments and in some of these articles where people sent emails to them, Mossack Fonseca, for instance, in Panama, never got replies and stuff like that, and accused them and said, because of your laxity, now people end up having to pay taxes and things of that nature because of what you allowed to occur as well. We have a time check now before our 8 o'clock news, folks. Please stay tuned. When we return from the 8 o'clock news, we're going to talk about Mr. Miller's motion in the Legislative Assembly, the Speaker's acceptance of that motion, and what will take place in relation to actions against one of the chief officers within the civil service. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back immediately after the 8 o'clock news. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. It is my pleasure to have in the studio with me this morning Honorable D. Azad Miller, Leader of the Opposition. Before we went to our 8 o'clock news break, I mentioned the fact that the news has come out that the Speaker, Honorable Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, has approved your motion. Mr. Miller, tell our listening and viewing audience about this news and as well as information about your motion.
Yeah, the Speaker has in fact approved the motion, which the results section will see it. And let me use some of the caveats that lady used so that if I make a mistake, people, I don't have the paper before me. I'm speaking from memory, I really don't. But basically, the results section of the motion will ask the Legislative Assembly to find Ms. Jennifer Ahern in contempt. And if the Legislative Assembly finds her in contempt, then the matter is referred to the Director of Public Prosecutions for her to determine whether there's sufficient evidence to prosecute her under Penal Code 103 and 104, I think. But this is about restoring, about establishing the authority of the Legislative Assembly, and particular the confirmation of the authority of the Public Accounts Committee, which is the only constitutionally authorized and enabled committee of the Legislative Assembly that can hold civil servants to account, particularly for expenditure that is approved by Finance Committee and the annual budget, because even Finance Committee itself does not have the kind of ability to inquire into how the money was spent. Both the Public Accounts has the authority to inquire both into the accuracy of the accounting, i.e., was the money spent for the purposes for which it was voted for by the Legislative Assembly, and secondly, did the country get value for money for what was going on? And the debate, therefore, and the onus, I think, is on members of all 19 members of the Legislative Assembly to conform the authority and to let the civil service know that you just can't come down to the Legislative Assembly and tell any old story and go to get yourself off the hook, and do what the Deputy Governor has now given them basically carte blanche to do, is to do one or two things. Erroneously, to use his language rather than lie, erroneously inform the committee, but place enough of these caveats that you don't have the paper in front of you, you're really speaking from memory, to buffer you from prosecution for under the penal code for contempt. And that's okay to do, or to always plead the fifth and say, well, I don't have the information before me, I can't answer the question, but I'll get you the information, right? Because that then gives the civil service the ability to go back and, if necessary, alter records between the time frame of being asked the questions. And the country needs to understand that from where I sit as chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, a chief officer, in my view, has a duty. They have a responsibility, right? They are required to know these things, right? And when it comes to the wholesale removal of all members of a board, in particular of the importance of the Medical and Dental Council, which is statutory authorized to ensure and to protect the public from any kind of quacks getting registered, to make sure that people who are being registered are competent, are of good character, and is good for the country. To allow a chief officer and a minister to remove a whole board and no explanation is given, and then the first meeting of the new board, things happen that in my view really shouldn't happen. But again, this debate and this vote is, in my view, whether the 19 members of the Legislative Assembly is prepared to cede to the Deputy Governor and the Chief Officer, and in fact all civil servants, right, the authority that the Constitution gives to the Public Accounts Committee and to the Auditor General to inquire into the accuracy of their accounting and whether we're getting money for it. Because if you can simply come down to that Public Accounts Committee and not tell and erroneously inform us, what's the point? You know, because there has to be an expectation by members of the committee and members of the Legislative Assembly and the public, members of the public, that when the Public Accounts holds these inquiries, that there is an expectation, there is an onus, there's a responsibility on the witnesses to tell the truth, right? What we have now is a situation where, in my view, the Deputy Governor has given these very people, right, a way out. And if telling the truth is going to in any way embarrass, in any way show incompetence, misfeasance, malfeasance of office, or any of that stuff, they simply plead the fifth. Or they erroneously inform us, and we won't know the difference, but they build in the safety net of saying, well, I don't have the paper in front of me, well, I don't remember, well, I'm speaking from memory, well, I don't really know. You know? It to use an old North side phrase, it denuts the whole committee.
I take it that you derive no pleasure from having to do this. I recall someone saying when it was stated that a person was ordered in court to be held in jail at the governor's pleasure. Why would the governor have the pleasure in keeping someone in jail for so long? So I take it that you derive no pleasure from this whatsoever.
I am not going to get any enjoy, nor am I going to get any personal pleasure in doing what I have to do. But this is about principle. This is about integrity of the process. This is about doing my job, And I tell people, if you don't want a job done, don't give it to me because I like to get it done. I might step on a few toes getting it done too. But there will not be any joy in my heart in having to attack the civil service. Because by and large, you've heard me say many times that we have a very good civil service. By and large, the country relies and has to place a certain amount of confidence and a certain amount of responsibility and authority in chief officers to say to a runaway minister, for instance, look, you need to slow down. We can't do it this way, And so, but my disappointment comes from the fact that I have no knowledge that the other chief officers are not stepping up to the plate and saying this is wrong. They seem to be allowing the deputy governor to drag them down to this level, and that is unfortunate because we have some very good chief officers, and we had the incidents last year where one chief officer left shortly after, shall I say, an appearance to before the Public Accounts Committee, and we didn't have a whole pile of discussion about that, whether I was right or whether I was wrong, and we certainly didn't see members of the Legislative Assembly coming to that person's defense. And that person didn't lie. That person refused to move from the mandate that she had been given by government and from the government line. That's all that person did. That person stuck to what the minister required her to do and what the government policy of the day was. The fact that we consistently, from evidence in the reports and from other evidence, that policy was not working, was not achieving the outcome or the output that we expected it to and that the public should have been getting, we could not get that chief officer to move from the government line, and all she did was defend the government line. But here we have a situation.
She was doing her job, really.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I didn't agree with the stance she took and some of the answers she gave, but she did what a chief officer is supposed to do. She didn't tell any, she didn't make up any stories, right? She didn't plead any fifth. She didn't put any caveats or anything. She simply said, this is what was done, and this is why we did it. And when we said, but that didn't get the desired income, she would not accept that. She said, this was the policy. I followed the policy. I followed the rules.
Okay, let's take a commercial break. Folks, please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, the Honorable Diaz Miller, Leader of the Opposition. The LA resumes next week, Wednesday, is it? Okay.
Yeah, you were talking about the revolt within the Public Accounts Committee. And that's a matter that I will deal with separately as chairman. And I expect that they will have the opportunity to explain to the public that they represent what brought about the change of mind, right? And one would think that would have to be really substantial and not a lobby from the civil service. I trust that this is not a situation where their change of mind is related to them trying to get kudos from the civil service to get things done or support. So, but the matter of the revolt within the committee, I'll deal with at the very next meeting, actually. And I will have certain things to say within the committee, which will not be necessarily for public consumption, because they will have an opportunity on Wednesday when this matter comes up to explain to the public why they have departed from a document that they freely and willingly signed, saying this was the process that they wanted followed. And
Okay. I am looking at this UK Parliament's Joint Committee on Human Rights and the Remedial Order, the British Nationality Act 1981 Remedial Order 2018. They have stated that it is expected that this order will come into force sometime in early 2019. So, we're within 6 months, 7 months, it's likely to come. And they've done it as a remedial order because it is a much more efficient and faster process than doing a bill to amend the British Nationality Act.
Rather like one of Trump's executive orders.
Yeah.
Akin there too.
Yes. Yep. Now,
the problem, I think that and this is your area of expertise, but as I understand it, what that's is purporting to say, and what they want done is that prior to the 77 amendment, I believe it was, if you were born in the Cayman Islands, you had a right to claim British nationality, whether your parents were Caymanians or not, right? Under the old British Nationality Act, which we understood was changed basically because of the Hong Kong situation, or the possibility of too many of them wanting to migrate to the UK if Hong Kong went back to China. And the situation we have in Cayman now, in order to claim BOTC as a result of your connection to Cayman, you have to be born in this country of at least one Caymanian parent.
Or if you were born outside, then there are certain.
But you must have a connection of one Caymanian parent.
Right.
And it doesn't matter whether that's the mother or the father. If it's the father, they can go the extra mile and say they want a DNA test or something.
Yeah. Now the report's recommendations, and I'll read each one of them. It is unacceptable that your British nationality should depend on whether your parents were married. So they want to address that issue.
And that's irrelevant to us because in our case it doesn't apply.
But for status, but for nationality, under the British Nationality Act, it does.
Oh, okay.
It does. Yep. People shouldn't have to pay fees again when they're having to reapply for nationality because of previous discrimination. So that they shouldn't, if they applied before, had it rejected because of discriminatory measures in the British Nationality Act, if they apply again, they shouldn't have to pay for it. Then it says British mothers should be able to pass on British nationality to their children in the same way that fathers can. So that's another thing that they wanted rectified. That significant discrimination persists in getting British overseas territorial citizen, that's the one that I really want to discuss. And then the last one, that the government should act to remedy other discrimination in British nationality law as soon as possible. Now, the one that significant discrimination persists in getting British overseas territorial citizen. It is important for us to know what they are seeking to replace that with. They have said that they will consult with the overseas territories on this issue. I have not heard any or seen any information that tells me that the overseas territories have been consulted on this issue before. The reason that it should be concerning to us here in the Cayman Islands is that our immigration law, part and parcel of you being able to obtain Caymanian status on grounds of residency, right, is that you must also be a British overseas territory citizen. And if you were a British overseas territory citizen for 5 years before you make your application for Caymanian status, then you're okay. If it hasn't been 5 years, then you have to wait 15 years before you can apply for Caymanian status. In either respect, we have factored into the acquisition of Caymanian status the fact that you have to be a British overseas territory citizen. Now, if the UK are looking to relax how you acquire British overseas territorial citizen, it may open the floodgates to a certain extent to Caymanian status, for us, because it may mean people get it easier. So do you want then for someone who's able to acquire British overseas territorial citizen easier for them to require them to have that for status or remove it out altogether? Because we could end up with the UK's legislation watering down our requirements for Caymanian,
and making decisions that we want to make
status,
ourselves.
Yeah, we have done it as far as the Constitution is concerned in relation to qualifications to be an elector. You no longer have to possess British overseas territorial citizen for that. We may want to look at doing the same thing when it comes to status. But the conversation hasn't taken place yet.
But, and
we need to inquire about it, because what we don't want, again, we don't want it to be dropped down our throats. When this remedial order comes into effect, we will have it's no sense reacting after that and saying, this is going to affect us. We need to get on the ball now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. We certainly need to make the government needs to make whatever representation it needs to whoever is responsible in the British Civil Service and Ministry to implement that order and make sure that we have some discussion and we understand clearly what it means to us. Because if it means, for instance, that anybody can come here and have a child and none of the parents are in any way connected to Cayman, they can then claim British overseas territorial citizenship, separate and apart from the fact that they intend to get Cayman status. But once they get the British overseas territorial citizenship, by virtue of having been born in Cayman, then they will have the opportunity to apply, and it's going to be very difficult to deny it, to give them Cayman status, because it's almost automatic.
And I mentioned the status issue, but there's also a section in our immigration law that speaks to a person's ability to reside permanently in the Cayman Islands. And when we take the 9 o'clock break, I'll do a quick research on the immigration law to point that section out as well.
Because but they have British overseas, the other side of it, if they have British overseas territorial citizenship by virtue of Cayman, one, can we enforce that they need a work permit? Be very difficult, I would think, to do that, right? And can we say that they're not...
if they don't have status, they have to have the work permit.
Okay,
yes.
so that you're still protected by it.
Yes.
But these are the kind of discussions that we need to have so that we clearly understand, what's entailed in it and what it means to us. And I'm, like I said earlier, I'm also concerned because I think there was an underlying implication there that one of the things they wanted to remove as well was a character reference to which is very important to us. I want us to get back to the days when you had to put your picture in the paper, personally.
So, and what I'm not saying that this isn't being addressed by the government, but if it is, we don't know about it, and we need to get some public input in relation to this. So, again,
this is the kind of things that we need to have town hall meetings about.
Yeah,
and talk to all of the various all our political action committees, because we must not be living in this cocoon that we don't think we have political action committees in Cayman. We have lots of them, right? And we need to get them on board when we have things like this, so that we're speaking of one voice.
Yes,
and or at least whatever voice we comes out is a mix of all of the opinions that exist out there.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the our representative in the UK, the Cayman Islands office in the UK, I'm sure that they know what's going on with this. What we don't know is we don't know what stage it's at. We need to go, if we haven't already gone to the UK, we need to go to them, and we need to say, we note that this committee has said that we will consult with the overseas territories in this regard, because we want to make changes as far as British overseas territories citizenship is concerned. What the public needs to understand is that we have no say whatsoever over the British Nationality Act. We can't go and amend it ourselves. We can only tailor our laws to either suit what the British Nationality Act does, or if we want to counter what the British Nationality Act does, because we want to be in control of our own local immigration and want to be in control of who's able to reside permanently here in the islands, who's able to acquire Caymanian status here, then it is important for us to know what they're doing there so that we can be in a position to counter that if it is necessary. We're going to go to headline news at 9 o'clock. Folks, please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, the Honorable Diaz Miller, Leader of the Opposition. Before I go back to Mr. Miller, I just want to point out that the UK has declared June 22nd as Windrush Day. Goes to show you that when people get up and make noise, when they agitate, when they expose all of the injustices that are meted out to people who are either less fortunate, people who are not of the same complexion, the same skin texture as others, that action, things can happen. Things can happen. It may be insignificant to some to say, well, you're now naming or designated June 22nd as Windrush Day. That is a step forward in acknowledging the work that the people of the Caribbean did in terms of building the UK, putting it to where it is today, and not being slapped in the face or kicked in the butt and say, now you have to go because we have no records of you. We have no evidence that you came here legally. So that is a good start, Mr. Miller.
Again, that just shows the power of the people, eh?
Yes,
and,
yes.
And this debate here, again, is between the power of the people, who they acquiesce or who they give to us as their representatives in the Legislative Assembly to protect the public funds and to hold people accountable. Mm-hmm. That is what this is about. This is not about a fight between Ezra Miller and Jennifer Ahern. This is about who is in charge of the country, whether it is the elected representatives of government, i.e. in that we have the constitutional authority to hold civil servants accountable, or is a civil servant something unto its own, and therefore we can't question them, and they have a right to just make fun of us and forget about the whole thing.
Because there was a time in the Cayman Islands when the civil service ran the show.
Well, people are beginning to believe that they're still doing it. I don't think. And again, one of the interesting things that is going to come up in this debate is the doctrine of collective responsibility.
Okay. Yeah.
And again, I can only speak from what my view of collective responsibility is. Collective responsibility bites when cabinet makes a decision. In my view, this motion, this privilege motion, this is about the privileges of parliamentarians and the violation of those privileges by a civil servant. Mm-hmm. This is not a matter, in my view, that should go to cabinet for cabinet to take a collective decision, and therefore all members of cabinet are bound by the collective responsibility doctrine to support whatever the decision was.
So you will be asking, well, before we go there, let's detail for our audience the fact now that you submitted the motion to the Speaker. It has been approved. Let's go down the next steps now, all the way to the debate.
Right, the Business Committee now will have to put that motion on the agenda for the Legislative Assembly.
Mm-hmm. And the Business Committee consists of?
The Business Committee is made up of the Premier, the Deputy Premier, myself, Alva Suku, the Deputy Speaker of the House.
Okay.
And we basically just set down the business that has been properly authorized and properly presented to the LE. We everything is time barred. The government laws are time barred by the constitutional requirement of 21 days notice.
Okay.
private members' motions are time barred by 5 days, have to be submitted 5 days prior to the start of the meeting. Questions have to be in 10 days prior to the meeting.
Okay.
The reports and stuff should all be brought to the Parliament before the business committee meets, and then we put them on the business.
Okay.
This matter, I believe, will have to fall under the item on the agenda on a daily basis of matters of privilege, because this is a motion about the privileges. This is not a private member's motion being moved by me and seconded by other people. This is a privilege motion that is being tabled by the Public Accounts Committee because we believe our privilege to get accurate information. And there's specific clauses, Clause 16 of the Privileges, Powers, and Immunities Law lays out what that privilege is, that you commit an offense if you don't give us accurate information and you don't give us all of the information. So this motion is about a violation of that privilege that we have of expecting and demanding and being able to be told the truth. And we're saying that one person, in our view, deliberately didn't tell us the truth on a particular matter. And that's all laid out in facts. And again, this is not a situation where we had witness A who came and said that the sky was blue, and witness B, because they were sitting on the east side of the government administration building, and that's the only side they could see. And witness B, who happened to be sitting on the west side of the government administration building, comes and says the sky was black because they could see the nor'wester clouds approaching, right? This is a situation where a witness has appeared before the committee and said there were no wholesale changes to the Medical and Dental Council, and that the policy of the government was never to do that. So not only did they lie about the wholesale change, but the wholesale change did in fact violate its own policy, right? And that not being stated correctly to us. And we have produced the documented evidence of that is the Gazette notice, which authorizes the appointment and completes the process of appointment for members to this particular board, that had to be produced by that very same officer. So this is not a situation where the person all of this was done by some department that's in another building and you might not have heard about it. This was done deliberately by the very same officer who says it had not happened. When I lay out, and when you see, and I started it last week Friday, the process that this goes through, and the intimate, consistently, almost daily, certainly weekly involvement over that 4 to 6 week period that it took to complete this process of that individual officer, it is impossible to forget it, even if you tried. Much less you're trying to remember it and you forget it. No. So this the public needs to and it's going to be very interesting. And I will, in moving the motion, I'm going to ask that the doctrine of collective responsibility not apply, and that ministers are allowed to vote their conscience, which is the alternative in our parliamentary vernacular for collective responsibility. And what collective responsibility really ensures is that the government business stays intact. Because once members agree to a position taken in cabinet, it would really be an uncomfortable situation and an untenable and unworkable situation if members who agreed up there in cabinet could come down to the Legislative Assembly and depart from that decision and criticize it. I mean, we have seen evidence in the last couple of years of that happening. You know, we get a situation down there, even in Finance Committee, where ministers are asking other ministers questions, right? Which is kind of outside of the whole collective responsibility doctrine. So the alternative to that is members are allowed to vote their conscience because they are not bound by that collective responsibility.
I saw not wanting to depart from this, but I saw a situation, I think it happened in the UK a few days ago, where a minister was at the end of the day, or the mover of a particular bill or a motion, turned around and voted against his own bill afterwards, after they were able to strike a deal with the government and everyone, then they got the numbers to go the other way. So he voted against his own bill because he got what he wanted at the end of the day. As it stands, as far as the numbers go, the government would have the numbers.
Well, the reason they're the government, that's the reason they're the government. If I had the numbers, I would be the premier. Right?
But do you, and based on what you've said in terms of cabinets, collective responsibility, what about the non-cabinet members?
We have them? I have now to deal with a rather unfortunate revolt within my own committee, which is not unlike the Theresa may have to deal with her Brexit revolt, because we have had 2 members of our 5-member committee who basically have revolted against a decision that they authorized, a decision that they acquiesced to, a decision that they agreed with, a decision that they signed a document that was tabled in Parliament on the 16th of March laying out this process. They have now decided that they're not going to, they have informed me, they refused to sign the motion being tabled by the Public Accounts Committee. So one can only assume that means that they are not going to vote for the motion.
But there was no was there a legal requirement for them to sign that, or was it optional?
It was optional.
The motion.
I believe that the option should have come when the report was being signed. If they had refused to sign the report, but it is rather inconsistent, it's rather incomprehensible to me to sign. I would never do that. I would never sign a report that lays out a particular process, and when that process gets to its final hurdle, decide, well, I'm withdrawing my support. I would step down from the committee before I did that.
Okay, let's take a commercial break, folks. Please stay tuned for the record with the Honorable D. Ezard Miller. Will continue after this short commercial break. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I want to remind you that the phone lines are open. We haven't gotten any calls this morning, which is unusual. Our toll-free number, provided courtesy of Flo, 1-800-534-8255, 949-6990, 949-8730, I believe it is. Yes. WhatsApp number is 949-8037. 949-3261 is our WhatsApp number as well. We still no calls on the line, Ms. Susan? I mentioned earlier that there is a section in our immigration law that refers to permanent residents, and we have a call, but since I've started this, let's read it. Part 4, permanent residents and extended residency categories. And section 29, subsection 3 reads, a person who is a British Overseas Territories citizen. And I'm going to stop for a minute. You can only become a British Overseas Territories citizen by virtue of the provisions of the British Nationality Act 1981 that we spoke about earlier. And that will change with this remedial order, will possibly change as to how you will acquire British Overseas Territories citizen. So a person who is a British Overseas Territories citizen by virtue of a connection with the islands, by registration, by entitlement, under the British Nationality Act 1981, or any act preceding, amending, or replacing that act, shall have the right to remain permanently in the islands. And it goes on to say then, when the person ceases to have that right. Now, one of the provisions where the person can cease to have that right is if he engages in gainful occupation or any trade or business without the permission of the Work Permit Board, the Business Staffing Plan Board, the Caymanian Status and Permanent Residency Board, or the Chief Immigration Officer. So, as like you pointed out earlier, that you can have permanent residence by virtue of being a British overseas territory citizen by entitlement, but you still would require a work permit, which again is an unusual situation to have. Here you have a person who has British overseas territory citizen. They're entitled to a passport that says British overseas territory citizen, Cayman Islands, right? Mm-hmm. So they have the nationality, but they're under the control of a local legislation that determines if you can work, if you can own a business, if you can get a scholarship, and various other things.
That's
that contradiction that we have.
That's the kind of deliberate protectionist discrimination that they want to eliminate.
Right. And the only way that we get this rectified between the British Nationality Act and our immigration law, one of two ways is that if we have control over nationality, the issue of nationality, the UK are not going to give that to us unless they say the I word, the independence. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record. Good morning, caller. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning. How are you, sir?
Good morning to the Honorable Edward Miller.
Good morning.
Miller,
Good morning, sir.
the leader of the opposition. This is Steve McField.
Yes, sir.
As usual, we don't see the bigger picture. All we do is fight among each other, and we don't see the bigger picture. The English knows us by heart. That's what they usually say. They know who we are, and they know that we don't have much substance. We went up to England in 2009, and we were all there, not together. One on one side of the table, one on the other side of the table. Can you imagine? You go to the master to get freedom from him, and you are divided.
Yep.
You are divided. It is the most asinine thing I ever heard.
Well, just not to interrupt, but just for your information, I have told the Premier that I'm not going like that. He and I have to decide what the position is going to be before we go to the board. And I don't expect I will refuse to disagree with him, and I expect him to show me the same courtesy before the people renegotiate. If we have a difference, we must ask for a break, go lock up in a room, work our differences out, and come back and present a united front.
Because the British are the masters of this whole colonial system and how it works. They've invented it mostly from the Romans. So I say that to say, and Orit, I sort of disagree with you with saying that we don't have any controls. If you look at Section 16 of the Bill of Rights, it gives us control.
What I was saying is we have no control over what the British Nationality Act.
It doesn't matter. The Constitution gives us control over who we let in, how long they can stay, what kind of business they can engage in.
But not over who gets nationality.
Not who gets nationality.
Right.
But they cannot get nationality unless they come here and stay.
Okay. I'll concede that.
Well, you concede that. So if we don't let them stay long enough to get nationality, they will never get nationality.
Yes. No question about that, dog.
But we don't do anything about that. We just let Tom, Dick, and Harry come, and they can do what they want, and we don't do anything about it as long as they say they have a few dollars in their pocket. And this whole British nationality thing, I'm not going to tax you on it now, but I just want you to go and look at the requirements to be elected to the Legislative Assembly.
Yep.
Go and take a look at that again, and you'll see what is the aim for this whole thing.
Yeah. We still have the British Overseas Territory Citizen section for elected membership, but not for voting. Yeah.
Go and see that, and see what's going to happen to us.
But that needs to be tightened up. We need to make absolutely certain that only persons born of at least one
parent,
Caymanian parent can sit in the Legislative Assembly. And we got to get rid of this undoubtful language, this legalese that we have there. That's how we got to be written. Simple. You must be born of at least one Caymanian parent to be a member of the Legislative Assembly. End the story.
Okay. Still there, Doc?
Hello?
One Caymanian grandparent.
I don't even know if I want to extend it that far, but
it is there. But
yeah,
it
but
is
it's there now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So while we should be looking at these things internally and getting together to stay off the takeover of our country and to put us on the political reservation, we don't even read the Constitution. We do not even try to work the document that we have in front of us now, much less. Mr. Miller is probably the only one that has even complied with a section of the Constitution, which is Section 119. And that really bothers me. Why they will not do that, and why they will not bring in the law of the law to scrutinize the behavior in public life.
Standards in public life, yeah.
Standards in public life. So it's a bigger picture. And we sit down, we don't see the bigger picture, because as long as we can cut down the next Caymanian, and as long as we say we have enough money that we don't need to do anything, as long as we have a house in Lake Tahoe or in Costa Rica or in Miami we can go to, we don't give a damn about the next person. That is how we are. And they know it. And they work us every time. And they will always do it because they know we are just mediocre people. We don't stand for anything. We don't sacrifice anything at all. Yeah. As long as our belly is hungry.
They'll find out. They know that I'm not like that. Because I know they got my picture up on the board up there from the 80s where they can throw darts at that when they want to attack me. Because I have stood up to them before and I will stand up to them again.
So it's a bigger picture. It's a bigger picture that they're after.
Yeah, it's just like this. It's just like this. It's just like this motion of privileges. This motion is about the authority of the people through their representatives to hold civil servants account. And if this motion is defeated, we have acquiesced that authority that the people gave us by electing us to senior civil service management.
Okay, caller, I want to thank you very much for that intervention there. Certainly appreciated. I have a question from one of our listeners, and it says, if a person was married to a Caymanian and is now divorced, but still holds permanent residency with the right to work, that individual has 2 Caymanian children. The person has been living in Cayman for 9.5 years.
But they should have status
which her 10th year anniversary is coming up soon. Can that individual apply for Caymanian status on their own? And the answer to that is yes, they can.
They should
on grounds of resident.
They should have applied because they would be subject to an ERC, Employment Rights Certificate, married to Caymanian. They should have applied in year 6 for it to be granted in year 7.
What they didn't tell us was when the divorce took place.
Right, or whether they have gotten that ERC renewed.
Yeah.
It would be difficult to get the ERC
renewed. They wouldn't have
divorce.
On the divorce after the divorce. But they now says, but still holding a PR with the right to work. So that means that after the RERC was revoked, possibly because basically fell away after the divorce, that the person was then able to acquire permanent residence with the right to work.
And they have the right to apply for status in year.
They have right. Have the but I believe in this particular case that the whole issue of British overseas territorial citizenship and things may kick in because they're applying on grounds of residence. That may kick in as well. I'm told that we have a caller. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning to everyone. I have a question that I don't really have all of the details, but I have sufficient to ask the question, I think.
Sure.
I lately was made aware of a situation where a lady married to a Cayman, someone that was granted Cayman status, and she subsequently got her Cayman status or permanent residency. I don't know what she got with as a result of her husband. Now, he did not pay for his Cayman status. He had it for quite a while and did not pay for it. She was unaware of it.
Well, you don't have it until you pay for it, as far as I know.
Pardon me?
I don't think you have it until it's actually paid for.
Okay.
I think it was been granted, but unless you paid for it, I don't know if you've actually completed the process.
And I'm trying to determine whether or not there's a time frame within which payment has to be made, or it goes back to the board for revocation.
Yeah.
Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, sorry.
She ended up paid for her part of the whatever she was granted. She paid for hers. He didn't pay for his. Then he was asked to leave as a result of that. She has 2 children. Now she has to leave also, because hers was taken away as a result of his.
Oh, it sounds as if
taken away.
She had hers on the strength of his.
And
she was like a dependent.
And he didn't get his
household.
So hers would be revoked because he didn't get his. He didn't complete the process to get his.
So what can she do? She paid for hers. Does she get a refund, or does she just have to just forget about it and leave? Does she have any recourse, to reapply or anything like that?
It would be difficult for us to answer, not knowing the details. And even if we were to answer, we're not authorities per se on it. So, we could only basically give advice. But what the person needs to look at, and if you heard what I read before with the other individual, look at her personal circumstances to see whether or not she now qualifies to apply on her own.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, then. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's take a commercial break. For the record, with the Honorable Diaz Miller will continue after this short commercial break, and we will have the last 15 minutes of the show this morning. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We have 2 calls queued up. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, gentlemen. Number 1 from the block.
Morning, number 1. How are you?
I'm listening to you. Ezra, I hear you too.
Good. This is number 2 from the other side.
Yeah, I know that. You sure you're not number 10?
No. I working on taking number 1 away from you.
No, you won't.
I'm getting close. A couple of years ago, I was number 3 or 4, and number 2 now. You get worried.
You don't worry me. Listen, I want to ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
You all fighting about all this thing with this person about in some job in government, and government won't do nothing, answer the clear, and fighting about all this England trying to find out all about who working down here, who got business. How come you don't hear nobody talking about these 2 up in court war fight about same-sex marriage?
Oh, we can talk about that too.
Oh, we talk about that regular. I know. So I don't see how you can say we're not talking about it.
We'll need to have a whole day's show for that, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of calls because, number 1, I need to tell you this, and I had a discussion yesterday. Actually, the person that I had that discussion with is actually originally from the BRAC, and there are more and more people who are saying that these issues that are coming to the fore now in relation that the younger generation are going to be the ones to move this forward. They're the ones who are advocating for it. And yes, while we take our traditional position as far as marriage between 2 persons is concerned, that a change is going to come in the Cayman Islands.
It's going to come, but while the older ones is there, keep it straight. Tell them younger ones, no, and with a capital N.
I believe the younger ones are going to say yes with a capital Y.
Well, they can say, but they're not up in the house, so you don't have to pass. Tell everyone, from you to Premier straight down. Tell England or whoever it is, or court, no, we don't want that here. That's nastiness. Okay, sir?
Well, I have a duty to represent what the people want me to represent, you know.
So if the people tell you yes, you can go and say yes. If that's the case, I won't speak to you no more.
Thank you very much, number one, for that. Let's go to the next caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Mr. Azard. How are you all doing today?
Good, I'm doing fine.
Fine.
How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
Oh, thankful. I've been following Mr. Azard and Mr. Chris Saunders pertaining to the case with Jennifer O'Hearn, the chief officer.
Ahern.
Yes, ma'am.
Ahern. My question is, right? You remember this case? We have a case going on right now with Canova Watson. You know, what was it, the care pair package or something? Wasn't she the chief officer that everything that was issued from that department, she signed off on it?
But I don't know whether she signed it off, but she was the chief officer when that whole
Why
thing
is
took place.
Canova Watson taking the fall for this? She not placed on suspension. To me, for him to get, whatever he got, had to be signed off by her, a chief officer.
Well, remember that the deputy governor did an internal audit for corruption and came back and said he found no evidence of corruption. What he didn't do was an internal audit on malfeasance of office. In other words, failure to do her job. Because that, I believe, he would not have gotten the result in favor of her that he did.
Mr. Ezra, I know that we didn't put you all there to say, just put you there. You know what you're doing, right?
I'm trying.
But I've seen people in government that have been placed, maybe not even at the level she is. And she's in a very important position because she's the one that got to keep checks and balances.
Yep.
And if you do not keep her accountable for any wrongdoing, that sets a trend that really says a lot about Cayman Islands government and how that's not transparency. That is, I really believe that she should have been placed on suspension while being investigated. Because there's people working in government right now, customs, immigration, that is on suspension for less offenses.
Yep.
They're just being investigated, but they're being on paid leave, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
But
we
it would take me more time than this show allows for me to give you what I believe are examples and consistent examples of malfeasance of office on this individual. But unfortunately, I suspect that it will be a big part of the debate. But that is not what this fight is about. This fight is about whether the people's representative have an expectation and have a duty to hold civil servants accountable and an expectation that they will tell the truth.
Well, I believe we do.
Absolutely.
I really believe we do. And I can leave you all, but let me, one other thing, Mr. Orid, I know I run in short of time, but anyway, Mr. Orid.
Sure.
Also, this beneficial ownership register, same-sex marriage, this is all a part of our Constitution. Now, if England is violating our rights by telling us we got to have something that is not necessarily a global standard, can we, on the company, the beneficial ownership register and the same-sex marriage, that is in our Constitution, I believe we respect that they are gay, and we know who you are. But when you come to somebody and say, okay, you're gay, okay, we got that over with, you're gay. We're not. This is our beliefs. I believe that should stand for something. Mr. Ezra, can we vote like on a referendum to say that England is forcing us, just like on the beneficial ownership, to do something that is not compliant globally? But can we also vote to defend the Constitution in a referendum by the people? Well, anyway, I can leave you and let you go so you can make your comment, okay? And I have a good weekend, okay?
Thank
you very much, caller. You too, also.
The country, the government can hold a referendum on anything. And certainly I believe that matter should be the subject of a referendum if we're going to make any changes to the marriage law. I am not in favor of making any changes to the marriage law. I would like to see their rights being protected in some kind of civil union legislation, which also incorporates into it what we in Cayman call common law marriages, and so that they can get similar benefits from a common law marriage. But whether we can actually override the United Kingdom's authority under the Constitution in writing legislation for us is questionable through a referendum, which is why I have joined in supporting the Premier in asking the British government to remove from the Constitution what I've always called and always objected to, the nuclear option, where they can, through order in council, amend our domestic legislation. What we have now is a case where we've gone kind of beyond that, where the House of Commons have assumed that they also have the authority to instruct the Privy Council to issue, and under that clause, I don't think it is deniable. I don't think it can be successfully argued that they don't have that authority, which is why I believe it is so urgent and so important to have that clause, if not removed, certainly tempered with applying some conditions to it. I think one of our former governors, Governor Scott, used to call it belts and braces around it, so that we lessen the impact and lessen the opportunities that they have to do that.
Okay. I think we're going to squeeze one more call in before we close off. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Ossie. Good morning to you.
Morning, sir.
The honourable leader of the opposition, Mr.
Morning,
Miller.
sir.
I just here quickly. Yes, I agree with Mr. Miller. It should be. This is a very important issue to many older Caymanians. I mean, it was not the whole, but that is our way of life. That it should be by referendum. But and then again, we are crown colonies, so will England recognize that outcome or whatever? But I noticed that the Compass, again, in their editorial yesterday, when they sort of put in this business, as Dr. McLeod called, of allowing, people who are not Caymanian status or citizens to vote. And I think we shouldn't go down that route. I believe that the Guernsey and the Isle of Man, I think that if you're on a work permit there and you keep it going for 5 years or something, that you can vote. Is that true? Do you know that?
Not aware of it. I would have to check it out.
I saw that in the...
Yeah, I think the speaker, but that was part of his presentation on the population.
Yes.
But they do that in order to encourage people to go. But their percentage of work permits in their country is nowhere near what it is like in Cayman.
But still, that it is there that if they keep the work permit going for, I think it's 5 years or beyond.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's...
well, remember, we had it at 5 years at one point. We had it at 3 years. After you got a work permit for 3 years, you could apply for status. And then it went to 5, then it went to 7. And the latest amendment is that it went to 9. But everybody, before that, there were certain conditions that had to be met in order to activate the application process. Mm-hmm. And not just being here on a work permit didn't necessarily entitle you to apply.
Okay, caller, thank you very much for that question. Mr. Miller, some wrap-up points as well. I see where it appears, and Mr. MLA, Mr. McLean, isn't here with us today, but looks as if work has started now on the guardrails to the southeast of Lover's Wall. The guardrails. Being done there, and I think he said the paving wasn't going to start until the issue of widening the road. I think Mr. Verneil Frederick's side of the road, they were looking to do something there. I don't know if they've gotten that all sorted out yet, but it looks as if some work has resumed there on the in the High Rock area.
Good. Needs that's really needed badly.
Yeah. Anything on the area at the road out to Caibo?
Well, The problem with the road to Caibo is that there's so much infringements in the road. I mean, in terms of fences and gardens and everything else. And I saw now that I met with the NRA some weeks ago, and we decided on a way forward in that, first of all, the road has to be located properly as it was gazetted, and all of those landowners who have infringements in the road have to be notified in accordance with the law to move them. If they don't move them within a certain time frame, then the NRA can go in and just dig them up because they're in the road. So I see that I noticed on the weekend when you ride along the road now, you see these little white pieces of pipe with the red ribbons on them. So that's being surveyed, but that's the problem with that, is we can't build a road if it's not in the proper place that is gazetted, because then there are all liability issues, right? And we know you go down, that a lot of the hedges and stuff are in the road. And every time I go to the Cayman to launch my boat and have to drive across that sign put up by the NRA, please walk on the other side of the road, because they refuse to cut down a hedge, right? So that's the process with that. But hopefully we can get it done. And I think there's money in the budget this year to do to the junction with Finger Key Road. Mm-hmm. Once we get it located properly and all of the infringements and encroachments, I think is the word that they use in the NRA legislation, are removed, then we can fix the road.
Okay. I just want to go back in my closing comments and refer again to the immigration law and the section in relation to Caymanian status. Says any person who, and I should say what section it is, if I hope it, section 20, subsection 3, any person who is a British Overseas Territory citizen by reason of a certificate of naturalization or registration issued under the British Nationality Act 1981 by virtue of his connection with the islands, or any act preceding, amending, or replacing that act may, if he has been legally and ordinarily resident in the islands for at least 15 years, or at least 5 years after the receipt of that grant, may apply for the grant of the right to be Caymanian. So there is no grant of the right to be Caymanian just on the basis of your residency alone.
Right. Yeah.
You can apply for permanent residence after the 8 years, 7 years, 8 years, whatever it is. You can apply for that, but then you have to go down the route of applying for Caymanian status afterwards, which means you must be a British Overseas Territory citizen. So the question in relation to the person who has the 2 children here, who is divorced, if that person has been registered or naturalized as a British Overseas Territory citizen, if they have had that for 5 years, 5 years after the receipt of that grant may apply, or if they were here for 15 years before. Obviously, I think the person said only 10 and a half years. So if they were here for at least 5 years after the receipt of the grant of naturalization or registration as a British Overseas Territory citizen, then they can do that. Now, one key part that we have in our legislation here, it talks about any British Nationality Act or any act preceding, amending, or replacing that act. So this whole amendment to the British Nationality Act
would take effect.
If we don't look at our legislation and see whatever is coming out of that amendment, that remedial order, if it is not suitable to us, if we don't not able to have input in it that will ensure that our legislation remains robust in terms of determining who will acquire Caymanian status, then this particular section kicks in as it stands now, and any act replacing or amending the British Nationality Act would come into effect here, folks. I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension for the record, into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I also want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters keepers. There is always someone out there who's less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want or even those who crave. I say to you, have a great day. Continue to support your radio station, Radio Cayman. Join Sterling, Dwayne Banks at 12 noon for Talk Today. And remember that the live Youth Parliament is taking place in our Legislative Assembly. You can follow that on Breeze 105.3 FM on Radio Cayman as well. And as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these three beautiful, wonderful Cayman Islands.